Welcome back, everybody, to Full Press Coverage Radio. This is the Full Press Coverage Pittsburgh Steelers podcast. This is your host, Parker Hurley. I am, as always, with my co-host, Brian Harker. Let's bring him in and see what he has to say. So, how are you doing today, Brian?
Doing pretty good. Enjoying my last day off for a while.
Nice. Last day off, and then Brian is on to work. So we're going to get together, and we're going to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, as we always do. Like I said, this is our 11th episode. We're in the middle of our off-season episodes. Where we're just going to go position by position and talk about almost every single player on the roster, really everyone who has a chance to make the roster, the 53-man roster. We've been talking about some practice squad, potential players as well. This position, we're going to talk about tight ends and O-line. We've talked about the quarterback already. We've talked about the running back already and the wide receivers. So those are all episodes you can check out in our archives. But today we're going to go with the tight end and the O-line. It seems like those are pretty straightforward, cut and dry positions at this point. A lot of continuity coming over from last year. Honestly, if you've been listening to our podcast for a while, you probably know our thoughts on a majority of the players we're going to talk about in this episode. But since it is more cut and dry, we'll put the two together. It should still be interesting because there is some developing factors. There's always depth to sort out. So the first one we're obviously going to start with tight ends. And really, it's almost a debate now, that some Steelers sites, some Steelers media are having as to whether or not Vance McDonald will outsnap Jesse James this season. And this is something that, like I said, if you've been listening to us, you probably know our feelings because I talk about Vance McDonald almost every chance I get because I see him as a huge upgrade over Jesse James. Not only in the blocking game, but also in the pass reception game. I know a lot of Steelers fans look at Vance McDonald for his drops, and he definitely has drops. But the thing about Vance McDonald is when he gets the ball in his hands, he's really good on the move, and he can really get out in space, and he can break big plays open. And I've talked about how the Steelers have a lot of talent in the slot, and that's able to take the deep middle of the field open. That was something we talked about in the last episode. And Vance McDonald can really take advantage of the short area, like I said, when he gets the ball in his hands. I've written a countless number of articles on fullpresscoverage.com. Just if you Google full press coverage, Parker Hurley, Vance McDonald, there will probably be a list of like 5 articles that come up, really where I highlight how much better he is of a blocker than Jesse James. And I think that's really underrated is how better he is blocking. It has to do with how much more athletic he is than Jesse James. It has to do with him being able to get on the move. He's able to pull. I show highlights where, when him, David DeCastro, when him and David DeCastro are pulling, and Roosevelt Nix are all pulling together, the three of them, it's just a barricade, and, it makes life a lot easier for Le'Veon Bell. I don't have the stat handy, but it's something along the lines of 4.9 yards per carry when McDonald is in the lineup, all the way down to like 3.9 when Vance McDonald is out of the lineup. That's not all on Vance McDonald, but he has a lot to do with this team running the ball more successfully. So without even getting into Jesse James much, it's clear that I'm rooting for Vance McDonald in this situation. I think Vance McDonald has a higher ceiling. I think he makes the offense more versatile overall. So I'm screaming that, he needs to outsnap Jesse James. I guess we'll get into the split here in a little bit, but do you want to either, make some sort of a case for Jesse James, or do you see it similarly? How do you see these two shaking out? How do you see their dynamics shaking out? And maybe if, of 100% of the snaps, what percent does Vance get and what percent does Jesse get?
Well, if Vance McDonald can stay healthy, he should be getting 60 to 70% of the snaps. The Steelers have been looking for a Heath Miller type tight end since Heath Miller retired, and really Vance McDonald is your Heath Miller type. People want to talk about his drop balls, and he had quite a few of them when he first got here. But, he's developing that chemistry with Ben Roethlisberger, and he's been working on that even more so this offseason. And as the seasons wore on, his hands got better. I mean, I blame a lot of his drop balls on the quarterbacks he played with in San Francisco. I mean, they weren't the most accurate. They didn't exactly put him in the best position to do anything after the catch, But Roethlisberger's been able to do that. And like you said, I mean, he opens up the whole middle of the field. I mean, you can destroy a defense by sending him down the seam. I mean, he's so athletic and he's so good after he gets the ball in his hands. Whereas, say, Jesse James is good. He's Jesse James should be a number 2. That's his best fit.
Right.
If Jesse James is your number 1, then your offense in that part of the game in the offense is somewhat in trouble because let's face it, James isn't going to have the best yak yards for a tight end. I mean, he's certainly got good hands and he's reliable, but as far as a playmaking tight end, Vance McDonald's the guy by far.
Exactly, and it's not to disparage Jesse James. And like you said, as a number 2 tight end, you kind of love Jesse James because he's a fine blocker. You know, he's not great as a blocker. You could say he's average as a blocker, and that's fine as a number 2 tight end. It's just not what you want as your, big blocking tight end. Like you said, he does have pass catching ability. It's just you want him in the red zone hauling in a touchdown, maybe a 5-yard reception where he kind of just goes up and gets it. You don't want him, like I said, with Vance McDonald. You can kind of dump it off to him. He can pick up 20 yards in, flip field position. Those are things that Vance McDonald can do that Jesse really can't. And that's why you can almost distinguish or decipher that Vance should be the number 1 tight end. Jesse should be the number 2 tight end, and that's really how it should go. I see it more as, I've seen some people say, it'll probably be a 50-50 split. I think it'll be a lot more into Vance McDonald's favor, and I know that the Steelers have been hinting that it's going to be a lot more in Vance McDonald's favor. And, it started halfway through last season. We've talked about it. It's really just the injuries are holding him back. I talked about this as a cut and dry position. It seems cut and dry that if Vance McDonald is healthy, he's going to get a lot more opportunity. And it seems like he's just always taken more advantage of these opportunities than Jesse James. So it's really just staying on the field for him. Like I said, I don't hate Jesse James, but he's definitely a perfect fit for a number 2 tight end. It does bring up the question that Jesse James is a free agent next year. So is Vance McDonald. But, we know that Vance McDonald's health is everything. It's going to decide everything in his future. Jesse James, we kind of know what he is as a player. So, he was a 5th-round pick. Are you saying, maybe Xavier Grimble takes a step forward? Maybe there's depth on the roster. Maybe in the 5th round again you find another number 2 tight end. What are you prioritizing re-signing Jesse James at all?
A lot of that depends on, like you said, can Xavier Grimbles, to me, is one of the most interesting tight ends on the roster. I mean, his athletic ability is unbelievable. I mean, it is up there with Antonio Gates. Problem is his hands are so inconsistent. He'll make the tough catch, and he'll look good doing it, but, just the simple catch. He seems to drop a lot of balls that he has no business dropping, and that's what's holding him back. If he could ever develop, I think he could make a guy like James expendable, as reliable as James is. Grimble just I'm not really impressed with his hands. That's the only thing holding him back.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I agree that it really kind of does it hinges on Grimble a little bit, and, if Grimble can take that step forward, then like I said, a practice squad guy, a late round pick, whatever, can step into the 3rd tight end, and Grimble's that number 2, and then you're really just saying, see you later, Jesse James, but it really is, the question with Grimble. You talked about it. It's his hands. It's also just overall consistency. He, just across the board, not even just his hands, really across the board. He is a guy, like you said, athleticism. Steelers Depot, I think it's Alex Kozora always says, when he shows up to training camp and he takes his shirt off, he's the most chiseled guy on the entire roster. And it may not even be close. There's guys like AB and then, but Xavier Grimble is just completely rocked out. It's just consistently on the football field. Kozora talked about in training camp, for the most rocked out guy, he's dealing with durability questions all the time. He's the one gassed on the second day of training camp, when, even the O-linemen are still pushing through. And you see it during games where, he's missing blocking assignments. He's not where he should be. He's making mental lapses. And it probably has to do with, he's gassed or he's, like I said, it's weird because for how in shape he looks, the long-term durability, it doesn't seem like he has that. And, it's tough to project that, he's going to get that because, like I said, physically you'd assume that he already has that ability, but it's really been a weakness of his, and it's probably what's hindering, they can't move on from a guy like Jesse James until they can figure that out from Xavier Grimble. But it still feels like, They like Xavier Grimble. They like the upside of Xavier Grimble. They can see that if Grimble could put it together consistently for even one season, that it would be an amazing season for him. It's just at this point he's probably their number 3 tight end. Kind of just to round out the group now, those are the 3 tight ends. It's really hard to see anyone else making the roster. We talked in our tight end or our running back preview just about how the last roster spot on the offensive side of the ball might come down to a guy like Stephen Ridley or Fitzgerald Toussaint taking on Jake McGee for the 4th tight end spot, or do you keep a 4th running back? And then I think it was like the first or second day of OTAs, Jake McGee is down and he's out for the season and he's placed on the injured reserve. So they were really saying here's the 3 tight ends. We might keep a 4th. It might be Jake McGee. Jake McGee's completely out of the picture now, so it's really, Xavier Grimble might have been saying, well, Jake McGee's a consistent blocker, whereas I'm not. Maybe I should watch myself. Now Xavier Grimble's completely on the roster. But, you start to look and, if James gets hurt, if Grimble gets hurt, the depth is extremely questionable now, because McGee was the guy, they kept him on the practice squad last year to be that 4th tight end, to be this player that, like I said, if emergencies happen. So you look at the roster now, you have Ryan Malik, Farrah McKever, Christian Scotland Williamson, 3 guys, I know 2 are definitely projects. I don't know too much about Ryan Malik. Do you see any of these 3 guys potentially making the practice squad, potentially making a roster push? I talked about it. Maybe one of these guys in 2019 is the reason that Jesse James could be gone because like you said, maybe Grimble moves up to the number 2. Maybe one of these guys takes a step forward. So what do you see out of one of these 3 guys? Because I personally don't see any of the 3 having a chance at the roster, but definitely the practice squad. So where do you stand?
I think the best chance for any of these tight ends belongs to a guy named Christian Scotland Williamson. For those who aren't familiar with him, he had a viral video from his rugby career playing for the Warriors in England, Worcester Warriors. I mean, he absolutely destroys a guy. And by the end of that game, that video went viral, and it launched his potential NFL career. So Pittsburgh gets a hold of him, signs him as a tight end. He's 6'9", he's 276 pounds, and he runs like a freight train. Now, this guy, he's intelligent. He's got a couple of 3 degrees and a master's degree in international business. So he's into the playbook. He's working with the jugs machine after practice. He's learning how to play a game where rather than catching everything in front of him, he's catching balls from a jugs machine over his shoulder, a couple hundred after every workout. If there's a guy that could sneak into the picture, I believe it could be this guy. I mean, chances are he's going to the practice squad. But I really like what this guy potentially could bring. He's got size, he's got speed, he's athletic. He's never hit or blocked with pads before. But I really think this could be an interesting guy to keep an eye on. He knows he's in it. He gave up a great career playing rugby to start something new here in the National Football League. So I would keep an eye on this guy. If anybody can make a move other than our top 3, this guy might be it.
Yeah, he's interesting just based on, how raw he is, and to the point where, if he even shows any type of progress or any type of understanding, like you said, of the playbook or how to, leverage himself with pads on, he is a guy that you kind of just throw in the practice squad and you just kind of, you try to shape this big ball of mold, or mold this big ball of clay. That's exactly the type of player he is. The upside's there. He's definitely worth investing in. He's a player that, you have to see what he's going to do in camp. I mean, there's obviously the chance that he just shows up to camp and looks completely lost. He's so slow compared to these guys because he doesn't really know what he's doing. And, maybe you say experiment over in a few weeks, but he's definitely a guy that has the upside to, like I said, if you just see anything, almost anything at all in terms of progression, you're probably keeping him around. Farrah McKever is an interesting guy too. You talked about he's 6'9", McKever's 6'6". You're talking about 2 guys who, we're talking about it. If Jesse James is gone next season, you have the big, long-armed red zone player, and that's what these 2 provide. Ryan Malik is more of a blocking guy from Virginia Tech. I don't really see him, sticking around. He would definitely have to prove himself a lot to get a practice squad spot. I think he's a guy that, maybe if someone gets hurt, he's making the roster over McKever or Scott Williams because he has a higher floor and he's probably more pro ready. But I don't think the upside's really there with a guy like Malik to where you're probably keeping the other two guys on the practice squad over him. So that really does wrap us up for the tight end position. Like I said, it's really cut and dry. You have the top three. We both really see McDonald, if he's healthy, ascending over James, and I don't think that's too controversial of a opinion either. So that'll just get us into the offensive line, which is it's honestly a pretty cut and dry position too, and it's amazing, and it's a great thing, and we remember that the Steelers, when they beat the Arizona Cardinals in the Super Bowl, and just everyone. It was arguably the worst offensive line to ever win a Super Bowl. So, from where they were at that point to where they are now on the offensive line, it's just incredible what they've been able to do with this position. And we'll kind of just swing it left to right, and then we'll get into some depth. So, just start with Alejandro Villanueva, who, you talk about an amazing find. We're going to talk later how the Steelers dumped a lot of resources into making this line better. But, I mean, just an incredible find. A defensive lineman from the Eagles or, a tight end from the Eagles. I think he was like both for the Eagles. They cut him. Mike Tomlin was the first person to call him the minute he got released. Villanueva remembers that and puts a lot of faith into Mike Tomlin for that. And, Tomlin got paid off for that very wise call. Villanueva turned into a starting caliber NFL left tackle. He is the lowest paid starting left tackle of any non-rookie salary left tackle. And I mean, there's even some rookie salary left tackles making more than Alejandro Villanueva. So as far as bang for your buck, as far as value, he's probably the best value on the team on the offensive line. But, as far as talent, he's probably the least talented offensive lineman on the team, which is impressive, and it's good because, he's probably an average-level starter. I think that's where you could put him at. I have questions with some of his speed off of the ball, some of his reach and bend, and that has to do with how big he is as a human being. That can be an issue, but it definitely hinders his game against some more, smaller athletic guys who can get really low and can bend around the edge. It does catch up to him sometimes. He led the offensive lineman in sacks allowed. But still, like I said, he's the lowest paid left tackle. He's an immense bargain. It's really tough to complain about anything Alejandro Villanueva brings. So where do you stand on Ali V as a whole?
Oh, I like him a lot. What he lacks in talent, he makes up for in work ethic. And like I say, this is a guy that spent, 3 tours in Afghanistan fighting for his life. I'm pretty sure he seems like a guy that truly appreciates what he has, what he's doing, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to be the best he can be. So yeah, and I bet you he might even be the best bang for the buck in the league. He has all pro moments. He never really is horrible, which for a guy with his lack of experience at the position, that's saying a lot. I mean, there's room to grow, and I could see this guy at some point in his career making the Pro Bowl just because of his work ethic.
Yeah, I would say non-rookie contract aside, the rookie contracts are just assigned, and obviously players can outperform those. Non-rookie contract aside, he is easily the best bang for your buck player in the entire NFL. To get that starting level caliber at that type of money is just incredible. To move on to left guard is, in my opinion, probably the most underrated player on the offensive line is Ramon Foster, and he's just been incredible the last couple years. He's missed some time here and there, but it's really nothing. It hasn't been anything serious. Just been a real stalwart, and somebody that when you're mixed in with Marquise Pouncey and David DeCastro, you almost get no credit whatsoever. But the continuity that he brings, the communication that he brings, he's really a communication leader of that group, and it's something that you don't really hear about. David DeCastro doesn't talk much, so it's clear that Ramon Foster does have some of that going for him. I think he's 31 now. And he'll probably be either him or Alejandro Villanueva will be the first offensive lineman of this group of 5 the team moves on from, mainly due to his age for Ramon Foster. I think like I said, he has one more year left on his contract. So where do you stand on Ramon Foster? How do you feel about him as the left guard? He's just been as consistent as you could expect over the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think. I mean, is there anybody on that line more steady than Ramon Foster? And he's become a leader on the team too. he's just somebody you can count on, snap in and snap out. And he's relative. I mean, yeah, he's had some health concerns or health issues, but for the most part, I mean, you count on him every Sunday. He's just going to do his job, and like you said, he's underrated. If he wasn't stuck between Pouncey and DeCastro, I mean, the guy would most certainly have a bigger name throughout the league than he does now. But he's probably my favorite offensive lineman, to be honest with you.
Yeah, he's so underrated, and it really has to do with the Pouncey to Castro thing. And we'll lump Pouncey and Castro together because, I mean, you want to talk about cut and dry. I mean, those two are copy and paste, man. I mean, it's as consistent as you want it to be, and that's exactly what you're looking for. I've always been a guy that, I think the media gave David DeCastro his due before he earned it, and I don't hold that against DeCastro. He was a first-round pick, and he's been consistent from, his rookie season on. He's never been below average as a player. He's always been above average. But I just think, he's been considered elite for like 5 years, and I really think that last year was easily the best season of his career. I thought he was incredible last year. I just think, like I said, him out in space with Vance McDonald was just so good. Finishing blocks. Penalties has always been an issue that I've had with him, and it's something that I've said, he can't be an all-pro guard, or he can't be a number 1 or 2 guard in the NFL when he has these penalty issues, and it's something that he really cut back on this year. I was really more impressed with David DeCastro this year than I ever have been in his career, and now I'm willing to say that he is one of the top 2 guards in the NFL, and I'm completely fine saying that. Maurkice Pouncey, obviously, very similar. I mean, I've seen him as a top 5 center, for a really long time now. It's been injuries that has only held him back, and some people have called Pouncey injury prone. I think that's the furthest thing from the truth, and I think that it's a very good time to just bring up the point where there's there's freak injuries and then there's injury prone. If you hurt your hamstring and then you come back and you hurt your hamstring and then you come back and you hurt your hamstring, you're injury prone because your hamstring, it's an issue that's not really going to get better. Maurkice Pouncey has been hurt with freak injury after freak injury. David DeCastro rolled up on his leg one time. Another player rolled up on his foot one time. Those are the things that happened to Maurkice Pouncey. And he has missed significant time, and he did miss the Super Bowl against the Green Bay Packers. Everything like that with an injury, but he's not injury prone. He just so happened to have a couple freak injuries. That's bad luck. That's not really his fault. But he is, Ramon Foster is a leader. Maurkice Pouncey, I think you could argue, even more than Ben Roethlisberger. I think when Maurkice Pouncey speaks, this entire locker room listens. That's the kind of person that Pouncey is. I really see him as the leader of the team. A good example of that was when James Harrison was released last year, and no one really said anything. And then Maurkice Pouncey said, you know what, I'm just going to say it like it is. He said James Harrison didn't want to be here. He said James Harrison was, bad teammate, this and that. He started all of that talk. And then once Pouncey said something, a lot of the younger players or a lot of the other players were saying, all right, let's go forward and let's say what we have to say about James Harrison. I'm not saying that, Pouncey's leading, these negative campaigns or attacks or anything, but when someone needs to say something in the locker room, it's probably Pouncey who has to say it first, is what I was getting at with that. So let's just hear what you think about, 2 all-pro potential players in Maurkice Pouncey and David DeCastro.
That's probably the best. They're the glue that holds that entire line together. They make everything work, and people follow their leads. I'm pretty sure, Mike Munchak's a great coach, but I'd be willing to bet that having DeCastro and Pouncey on that left side just makes everything so much easier for him. He's another quarterback on the field, Pouncey. I don't know that you could say enough about those two. When they're pulling and they're clearing away, like you said, what was it, 4.9 yards per carry?
Yeah.
When DeCastro and Pouncey and McDonald are leading the way, they make it possible for everything that gets done in that offense, I believe. They're a major part of it.
Yeah, I think Pouncey is one of the most underrated just pieces on the entire team because of what he really does bring. not just physically, but also emotionally and mentally. Him and Ben get along really well. And like I said, when he speaks, probably more than anybody else on the team, everybody listens to Marquise Pouncey. And I think that that's really underrated. Just onto the right tackle is Marcus Gilbert. And, the Steelers lost Chris Hubbard last year. Gilbert he missed some time with an injury last year. He missed some time with a suspension last year. So, like I said, on talent-wise, he is more talented than Alejandro Villanueva, but he probably has some of the most questions around him now. He's been really solid up until this last year, so it's tough to, just say 1 year and all of a sudden, oh, here comes, the bottom's going to come out, especially when the team who was so close to the situation kept him over Chris Hubbard. They could have elected and they could have managed and maneuvered to get rid of Gilbert and keep Chris Hubbard. They know what they have in Gilbert. They know that when Gilbert is going and when he's healthy and when he's not on steroids or whatever, not suspended, when that's going, he is right there, top 5 right tackle, potential Pro Bowl snub. I know some people, Mark Cabali, rides the train for Marcus Gilbert every single day. So I like Gilbert. I think he just has a lot to prove now. He has a chip on his shoulder that he's never really had before. So I'm hoping he gets back to that top 5 right tackle. But he's definitely at a crossroads. It could definitely turn one way or the other. So let's just hope it turns the right way for Gilbert. Is that kind of how you see it for him?
Yeah, I think Gilbert just had one of them years where if it could go wrong, it was going to go wrong.
Right.
And, he's just been that steady guy. He's the quiet guy on the line. He don't say much. But he's the one that I believe Pouncey recruited him to Pittsburgh. Told him, "Hey, man, you need to draft this guy. I played beside him. He knows what he's doing. He's smart. We got to have him." And I think that he'll get back. He'll bounce back this year, and he'll be the Marcus Gilbert that we've been used to seeing up until this past season.
Yeah, when Pouncey speaks, you listen. All the way up until, all the way up to Kevin Colbert. So, but yeah, I do think he had a little bit to do with it. And I think continuity is easily the most underrated aspect of offensive line play. Nobody talks about it, but, there are 5 skill players and there are 5 offensive linemen. The 5 skill players do not have to move in a synchronized motion with each other. If AB misses his route and Juju still runs a perfect route, Juju can still get the pass. But these 5 players are so close to each other and in such a confined space with each other that, they have to move in a synchronized motion and they have to move off of each other's movements. So continuity in the offensive line room, to me, is so much more important than continuity in any other positional group on the entire team due to that synchronized movement. And I think that, like we said, Gilbert was in and out of the lineup. But, this is year 7 of Marcus Gilbert in that room. So the ability to consistently bring back, the same starters every single year, the same depth every single year, the same players every single year, I really think that goes a long way. And, like you said, you added Mike Munchak and the sky's the limit for this offensive line. It could really be the best offensive line in the NFL, and nobody would really bat their eyes twice at it. It really would just take, one small step forward from Villanueva and Gilbert getting back to where he was, and all of a sudden they are the best offensive line. That's really all it's going to take. Let's look into the depth because very similarly to tight end, Jake McGee was supposed to be the guy, that was interesting that we were going to look to in training camp to see what he could be. This was a huge summer for Gerald Hawkins, the tackle from LSU. He hasn't really done much in his first 2 seasons, but he was really raw coming out, so you kind of didn't expect anything from his first 2 seasons. But then similarly to McGee, you're hoping for a big offseason. You're hoping to kind of put your microscope under him, and he winds up on the IR with an injury, so he's out for the season. Fortunately for the Steelers, they were able to draft Chukwuma Okorafor from Western Michigan, who is a bit of a project as well. But the Steelers are not looking to start him either. He's really just going to jump into that Gerald Hawkins role, and you're just hoping that he can develop quicker or faster than Gerald Hawkins. Like I said, he's probably long-term a Villanueva replacement, but for now he's just your swing tackle. You move to the swing guard, it's probably you're looking at Matt Filer and BJ Finney. Filer can really play any position, so it'll be a question as to how far Okorafor really gets based on, if a tackle goes down in week 5, is it Filer or is it Okorafor? I'd assume early on it would be Filer. But yeah, Filer can slide into guard as well. He can really play any offensive line position. So his versatility is what's going to keep him around. And then there's B.J. Finney, who would more so be the center guard, the swing center guard. He would really step in for either of those. Played both at Kansas State. Really just a great, a run grader. A guy who can get out on the move a little bit, but he's more of just a power runner. There's been some speculation that, he could be the guy that steps in for Ramon Foster long term. So, maybe the pieces of replacing the left side of the offensive line are already in motion. And that's why, like I said, this is such a cut and dry position. So it seems like those are the big 8 players on the offensive line. What do you think about those 3 depth players? And do you see any other depth players maybe competing with those 3? Maybe pushing the Steelers to try and keep 9 offensive linemen? Just what overall do you think of this team when it comes to the depth?
I think the depth is still pretty solid. I mean, it hurts that Hawkins went down for the year, but you got Filer and you got Finney. Hawkins would have certainly seen some playing time at some point, but I don't think it hurts the Steelers as much as, say, if they had lost Finney or if they had lost Filer. And I think Chukwuma Okafor, I think he has enough time. He could step in there and pretty much fill the role that Hawkins was going to fill. So I don't know that it's disappointing, but I don't know that it hurts them all that much. Of the 3 depth guys, you got Bryce Harris, you got R.J. Prince, and I don't know much about those guys, but I've been looking at Chris Schleger from UAB, University of Alabama at Birmingham, and his specialty is he's a heck of a run blocker. He played in 13 games, made 12 starts. They had a record-setting backfield, and he was part of them averaging a good part of it, 183.2 rushing yards per game. So the question would be, how is he in pass protection? I think that's gonna determine if he makes this roster at all. Is how good is he at pass protection?
Yeah, and I'll just point out, I've read a little bit about R.J. Prince. There's a good breakdown of him on SteelersDepot.com. I would just check that out if you were interested in what he could bring. I think that if a guy like Finney were to go down and get injured, you'd probably see a guy like Prince step right in for him. And I could also see Prince making the practice squad as well. But I do think that, that's probably, you roll with those 8 guys. Like we said, Filer can really play any of them. Finney can play guard or center. And, then Okorafor is kind of just your 8th guy. You're developing him, probably getting him out there. Potentially in that extra tight end / tackle role. But you'd assume that Filer will probably get a ton of that as well. So, like I said, there's not too much to, dig into. It should be a really strong offensive line. The tight end group, it could easily be a weakness. Vance McDonald could turn it into more than just a weakness, a little bit better than just a weakness. But, the depth isn't really there. Like we said, of all the depth players, the best of them should probably get to the practice squad as a best case scenario. So the tight end is really set as, they're 1, 2, 3. We know the 5 starters on the offensive line. And we know that, there's a top 3 in terms of depth, and they might keep a 9th guy. They might, honestly, it's hard to see them not keeping, those 8. And then it's really just a debate as to whether they keep a 9th, which I kind of doubt at this point. But we will definitely be checking for both the guys on both the tight ends for practice squad eligibility. We'll definitely be checking for Prince and Schleger for practice squad eligibility. So, Brian, do you have anything else just to wrap us up for? This is really the offensive side of the football now we're done with. So, we'll be getting into the defensive side next episode. So, just anything to wrap us up with?
As far as offensively goes and the success of these teams, tight end and offensive linemen are going to determine how much success the Steelers have overall in the season. They're underscored, but they're just so valuable. So these are going to be the 2 biggest units this season, I think.
Yeah, and maybe even more specifically, Vance McDonald and Marcus Gilbert. If those 2 take a step forward, or, if Gilbert gets back to where he was even, it would just be so huge for this team. I really think that those 2 are really the key to this thing because, like I said, Gilbert's at a crossroads. McDonald just needs to stay healthy. If you get a healthy and motivated Gilbert and you get a healthy McDonald, this team could really take a step forward. Like I said, top offensive line in the league, top offense in the league. It's all on the table. So that will shelf us for the offense. The offense is a little bit more positive than the defense at this point, but we'll start with the defensive line on our next episode, which really is another positive point for the Steelers roster. So stay tuned for that one. It should be in the next week or so. That was Brian Harker. You hear him every episode. He's on lastwordonprofootball.com. Check him out over there. Follow him on Twitter at SteelersZone. I'm Parker Hurley. I'm on Twitter at Parker Hurley, at FPC_Steelers. FullPressCoverage.com is where everything Steelers is that I have. Like I said, I've written a ton about Vance McDonald. Check out all of that on FullPressCoverage.com. And Full Press Coverage Radio, is where you'll find the hub spot for everything Steelers. This is our 11th episode. We've hit every offensive position. It's all in the archives. So check that out. That was Brian Harker. I'm Parker Hurley. We'll be back next week. You guys have a great day, and we will talk to you soon.